There's this massive gap between knowing you're doing something wrong, like probably screwing something up, and actually doing something about it. We live in this age of self-awareness where we all think that we know why we're acting a certain way, why we're hanging out with certain people, why we date certain people. We all understand our triggers. But here's what I've realized. Self-awareness without accountability is just sophisticated self-deception. And that distinction is costing us more than we realize. I used to think that I was incredibly self-aware. I could tell you exactly why I procrastinated on a certain task, why I had certain types of friendships in my life, why I kept attracting certain types of people in my life, why I made certain career moves. I had this whole psychological framework for myself. But you know what happened after I had all of that self-awareness? Nothing. Nothing actually changed. When we all think that we're becoming self-aware, we tend to say things like, for example, I would say to myself, oh, I know that I tend to overcommit and then burn out myself. Like, I just feel very burnt out. I know that I do this. And for some reason, that gives us this illusion of making progress, like, oh, because I've acknowledged the situation, that means I'm actually fixing it. But here's the thing, your brain actually loves this trick. It makes you feel like you're actually working on yourself when all you're doing is just observing and just like having this pattern recognition. I started noticing this when I started having same repetitive type of situations with people in my life. And I started seeing both personally and professionally, just like certain things where they kept repeating and I kept analyzing them. I kept asking myself, why is this happening? So why did this happen? Why did that happen? And then I started to figure out like, okay, I understand the root cause of this. I understand that there are certain people-pleasing tendencies within me that needs to be fixed. I would understand all of that and then go back to repeating the same patterns with different people. That's when I started to realize that self-awareness is just the start line, right? It's not the entire race itself. The real ego-threatening work is accountability. The real work is an accountability. And I think most of us confuse that if we know we did something wrong, acknowledging that is accountability, when in fact, acknowledging that and then doing something about it is what's called accountability. I've recognized that. I'm good for recognizing that. I'm skilled at recognizing that. You're the hero in your own story because you've recognized your mistake. And that's where your growth will just stall. The way to actually grow as a person is to take accountability and be like, I actually did that and I don't feel good about it. I don't feel great that I didn't prepare for the interview, but here's what I'm going to do next. Because when you take accountability, you have to face the fact that you are the person that's actively choosing these behaviors, that you're responsible for the outcomes you keep getting. And that is a very terrifying thought because you cannot blame your childhood. You cannot blame people around you. You cannot blame the market. You cannot blame anything around you except yourself. It means looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I'm the reason this is happening to me. I did X. I did not do Y. That is why this is happening to me. Ever since I was a kid, I've had extreme self-awareness. I've almost always known why I was doing the things I was doing. Of course, we're humans and we make mistakes. But the accountability factor, I've realized that very late. I've been in this game for a long time, and I can tell you, every time someone has to take real accountability, and I'm someone who loves to know when I've made mistakes and try to change them. But I think there are times when it becomes so unacceptable to the perception of yourself that you have that you just cannot kind of comprehend or readjust to the fact that this is completely your mistake. For example, ever since I was in high school, I've had very immense high standards for how or who I view as my friends. My friendship standards are very high, and it has always been very difficult for me to implement them because there's this fine line of being human and having standards and being nice to people. It's a line that I don't necessarily like walking in. And when I was in high school, I had this one friend tell me, hey, I feel like you give too much importance to friendships, right? She told me that I was giving a lot of mind share for friendships in my life. And at the time, I took that as a very bad sign, that I was heading down the path where I will end up not having friends at all, that I will lose everyone in my life, that everyone around me was right and that I was wrong. And I continue to implement that in a lot of different friendships after that. Like any friendship I would build, I would think to myself that if I give them too much importance, that this friendship is not going to work. But the problem was I couldn't do that. The problem was I always had high standards for what I expected from my friends or who I made friends with. And with that, I started holding everyone else in my life accountable for not being the person that they could be. And because of that high standard, whenever I made friends with people that were not meeting that standard, and I could see the potential in them, I would start asking myself, why can't they be that person? Why can they not be a better version of themselves? It took me years to kind of realize that people are who they are. They're not going to level up because you see potential in them. They will level up if they want to level up. If not, you just got to find people that can match our standards. So holding people accountable to things that they can just not do is a very exhausting process. Even then, it wasn't a complete realization of standards, right? I didn't know the word back then. For example, I had this one friend actually tell me, hey, whenever we have this argument, you tend to raise your voice a little bit. Your volume is a little higher than it normally is. The baseline and the voice you speak at when you're angry with me is not the same. And I would like for you to not do that going forward because I'm not okay with that. And when she said that, my immediate thought was to get defensive, to say like, no, I'm only talking out loud so loudly because you are talking over me. But then I was like, for a second, I just pulled myself back. We were on a call, so I could do that. I just took a deep breath and I told myself, you're absolutely doing what she's saying you're doing. You're absolutely being a little louder than you want to be because you want to get the point across. You can get the point across without being so violent about it. I told myself, calm down. She's right. You've got to take the accountability. You've got to take accountability for this. It stings in the moment. You are not the best version of yourself, but the only way to be the best version of yourself is to acknowledge the fact that you did raise your voice. And ever since then, I've never done that. And every time I talk to her, I don't think she realizes I think about this every time I talk to her, but every time I talk to her, I think about the mistake I did. I remember when this happened and I shouldn't do that. And she's still in my life and we're still good friends. So I think taking accountability really, really stings in the moment, but it only makes you a better person. I also had this one pattern of letting professional relationships getting one-sided. I would either be the only one reaching out all the time, or I would talk to them for a while and they would say they would do something and then they wouldn't do it. And I would just like pretend like that didn't happen at all and still go and talk to them, still go and have a conversation with them. All of these things really taught me a lot about, because I was in survival mode half the time. I was like, I just need to like make connections. I just need to do this. I just need to do that. And then I started realizing I'm just putting myself in situations to keep recreating this for me instead of demanding the respect that I deserve, no matter what job I'm doing, no matter what it is. The respect should come for who you are as a human being, regardless of what title you hold. But I think I was also holding back on this narrative of, wait, she's being a little abrasive or she's demanding for respect. Who is she to ask for this? I think I kind of had all of that in my back of my head, and I wanted to completely eliminate that and become the version of myself that I knew I wanted to be, which meant taking accountability for the fact that I may not be very well liked by everybody, and that's totally fine. And the moment I started admitting to myself that I am the one person who's putting herself in these situations, and the only person who can take me out of this is myself, and the only person who can set standards, who can set boundaries is myself. And here's the thing. When you start setting them, people around you are not going to like it. I even made a video on this. When you start setting boundaries, when you start becoming a different person, quote unquote, changing, nobody's going to like it because you're not the person that they recognize. There are two types of accountability. One is taking accountability in the present. One is taking accountability that can carry forward to the future. The first one is where you can go back to the situation or the person and take accountability. For example, if you screwed up in an interview, you can always send an email to them saying, hey, I feel like in this call, I forgot to mention A, B, and C. I kind of wanted to get that across because I don't want to lose the opportunity to convey what I have on mind. And I think that is one type of accountability. Instead of waiting for the result and then regretting and telling yourself that I could have done better, but they lost someone, it's their fault, it's, their loss. You can actually take accountability when you make mistakes and solve it right then and there. But there's a second type where most of the times you cannot go back on situations. There might have been bad breakups, bad workplace, toxic relationships. In that sense, you may not be able to go back to said situation or person and fix the problem. What you can do, the first essential step obviously is to be self-aware. Hey, I feel like I made this mistake that might have caused this issue. Number two is to be like, okay, I'm not going to repeat this, and here's how. The here's how framework is what's going to make you a better person. And I think in terms of like, if you take that in a romantic or professional relationship, it usually becomes this, oh, I'm going to become better for someone else. I'm going to become better for this company. I did not do well in that role, so I'm going to translate that and become better for this role. I don't think it works that way because all we're trying to do is just changing the object from A to B. And I've tried this. And I actually sat down and thought about this. The only way for me to change the outcome is to change the input. So once you recognize that, you will not even make the mistake in the first place here. For example, let's say that you went to a job interview and you were specifically asked to answer using the STAR method, right? And you don't do that. And then you come back out of the interview, You are self-aware enough to recognize that the reason that the interview did not go well is because you didn't use the STAR method. So now you start to realize it, you're self-aware, cool. The second step is to take accountability, to be like, okay, here's how I'm going to answer the question next time using STAR method, is to practice it, is to become so well versed in how you say it that when you go to the second interview, you're not doing it for them, you're just doing it for yourself because you've already recognized the mistake and fixed it. Now, it's no longer about the second company. This applies to any situation. Let's say you had friend A and you had this problem with friend A. You go back inside and work on yourself so that when friend B appears, it's not even a topic of conversation. So you have to go from awareness to accountability. But how do you actually do it? And I want to talk about 3 things that you have to keep in mind when you're actually trying to implement this. The first one being you have to get comfortable with the fact that you're the common denominator in all the situations, right? Every time you find yourself in a similar pattern, similar relationships, similar friendships, instead of asking yourself, why does this always happen to me? Ask yourself, what am I doing consistently that creates this outcome? And here's the thing, right? This isn't about self-blame. It's about self-responsibility. And there's a huge difference between them. Self-blame is like, I am stupid. I am so dumb that I let myself be back in the same situation again, or that I should have noticed the red flags. We tend to do these things. We tend to talk to ourselves this way. Self-responsibility sounds something like, I chose to prioritize a friend who's never actually been a good friend to me over working on a piece of task that would have actually moved my business forward. It sounds like I chose to say yes when I actually wanted to say no. One keeps you in shame and the other gives you power to change. The second thing is you should be willing to actually act on the accountability, not just saying, okay, I've taken accountability, I've realized it. Now I'm taking accountability. I'm going to change it this way. Great. Now you actually have to do it. It's like, it looks something like getting up in the morning when you say you're going to, even if motivation doesn't exist. It's like preparing for the job interview that you really just don't want, but you've taken on the role of showing up for the interview, so you do your due diligence. Showing up differently to the next relationship because you know your actions hurt the last person. It's basically changing your behavior, even if you feel extremely uncomfortable in the first few days. So for the longest time, I was only observing my patterns, and then I started tracking them. I started looking at the patterns and also understanding how I can shift them. Right? Because accountability is not a feeling, it's a practice. It's a practice of, I did X because of Y, it led to Z. Here's how I'm going to make sure that X, Y, and Z never happens again. So what I did was substitute the bad stuff with the good stuff. Anytime I would do something that I said. So for example, I don't like shopping. I don't like picking my outfits. I don't like all of the shebang that goes with it. But I also know that every time I ignore that, I skip the steps and actually just show up to an event or film a video, I don't feel good about myself. So I asked myself, this is a pattern that I've been repeating ever since I was a child. The only way to fix this is to actually do the thing that makes me so uncomfortable. And always dressing up and always putting on makeup is not something I'm very good at. So I'm actively trying to replace the bad with the good habit. And the third thing is, this is the most difficult realization, which is most times you will not get external validation. Unless, for example, if you're living with your parents and you tell your parents that you're going to wake up every day at 5 a.m. and you do that for 6 months, they might start noticing it and they might tell you, wait, this is great. You've been telling us that you wake up at 6 a.m. and you've been doing that. Amazing. Sometimes you don't get that because it could be internal. It's like when my friend told me, I feel like you're raising your voice a little bit when we're having this argument. And then it was an internal shift. I don't even think she realizes it. We've been friends ever since, and I don't think she realizes it. So you might have to be actually okay with not getting the credit for it, but still become a better version of yourself. And here's what I've learned, right? Accountability actually compounds over time. Every single time you start taking accountability for the things, you become self-aware, you take accountability for that, and then you show a changed action, right? Every time you start doing that, you start trusting yourself more. There's immense self-respect that comes within you. For example, every time I tell myself I'm not going to do X, and then I end up doing it, I lose respect for myself. But every time I tell myself I'm going to do something and I end up doing it, I get this like immense amount of confidence and self-love and appreciation for myself that I don't get in any other way. And that is why being disciplined also helps you, because you're doing the things you say you're going to do, and then you start trusting yourself more. Number 2 is people start treating you very differently, because there is some kind of attractiveness to being the person who says something and will do the thing, right? Or if they don't do it, they'll come forward and tell you that they're sorry they didn't do it and take accountability and face the consequences of not doing said action, right? There's something really great about these qualities. There are certain people that I look up to and very few people that I look up to in life, and all of those people have these qualities. One key thing that I've noticed is I actively keep practicing the thing that I want to change. I insert new behavior instead of insert bad behavior, right? I do that. The formula is that. And every time I do that, I gain respect for myself. I'm obviously not perfect at it. I still find myself sometimes having that mistake, but it's a very minuscule one. I recently had my mom tell me, I want to say something to you. I'm not sure how you're going to receive it, but you've been doing this X thing, even though you keep saying Y. And it really hit me because I had been thinking about it for a while at that point as well. But my immediate response was to get defensive. Not to her, but internally I felt like, this practice when someone tells you the thing you've already been thinking about, you go 10 times deeper into that and you dug this hole, you go 10 times deeper into it and then you don't want to come out of it. That is just what we do because we've been cornered. We've been told the thing that it's like someone showing you the worst someone proving the worst you think about yourself is actually true, right? And I did that for a second. And then I told myself, she's absolutely right. I better recognize this before I go deeper into this and get way worse at the X thing, right? See, it's up to me to realize that, okay, I've got to work on X. Otherwise, things are just going to get worse for me. And actually building a framework to decide, okay, I've done X and I need to fix it. Here's how I'm going to fix it. But because I understand how important this is, I've gotten faster at recognizing when something is good for me to take accountability for this. And it's like this character development for me where I get to be the better person. I can be the better version of myself if I just go through this one little transformation. And I think my inner world has become much more relaxed, much more reliable for me. And also to recognize that there are certain relationships I want to have in life and there are certain relationships I don't want to have in life. Like this inner work has actually made my standards even more higher in terms of friendships, who I surround myself with, what kind of conversations I want to have. And that is a huge shift that can only happen when we allow to explain and understand ourselves to ourselves, to just go inside and realize that, okay, I've been saying I want to do this, but I haven't done this. Okay, I say I'm this person, but I haven't shown one piece of evidence to myself to actually be that person. So my suggestion to you here is actually do something about it. Don't wait for it. Anytime the next situation, the next person, the next time you're in a situation, have an action plan ready so that you can trust yourself to know that that's never going to happen to me again. Because awareness is just a starting line. Accountability is how you get to the finish line.